think. So, we did meditation 1. We did meditation 2. We talked about both of those at our last meeting. You've read meditations 1 and 2 and understood them perfectly. If you did, you're either deceived, mistaken, or just smarter than I am. You've read meditations 3 and 4 too. We've had that assignment. Yeah. And you've had a homework quiz that's meditations 1 through 3, right? Cool. Today we're going to talk about meditations 3 and 4. I'm going to do as much of that as we can. It's going to involve some recap of meditations 1 and 2. Because why not? We can get a running start at 3 and 4. Because it's important stuff, and I want to make sure we've all got it. Because it strikes me that there might be somebody here who wasn't here on Friday. Yeah, okay, there we go. All right, so for your sake, for anybody's sake, and this is stuff that's worth rehearsing. I would say, in general, one of the most useful sort of tips that I would recommend to you as you're trying to read these texts, and some of them are very difficult, they're incredibly dense, really tough going. You find yourself, I'm sure, reading much, much slower than you would other sorts of texts. One of the easiest things that you can do is to make sure that you have it organized. This is a machine. The argument has certain parts in certain places so that it works the way that it does. So that's one of the reasons why I'll be recapping for each of these meditations, just to make sure that we get a sense of where the stuff that we're talking about now fits into an ongoing conversation that Descartes has got going with himself. Yes, Andrew.
From Thursday, when you went over meditation number 2, from my notes, it looks like the last thing you did was just talk about him positing that he exists. Is that
so yeah, there's that out of meditation 2. There's more that happens in meditation 2, right? It doesn't end just there. I'll cover some of that stuff today. There's at least one passage, the passage about the piece of wax, that I'm probably not, I'll touch on it maybe. If you guys want to go into more detail, we can. But to be totally honest, especially if we're looking at kind of trying to budget our economy of time here, I don't want to spend too much time talking on it because it's one of a few different places in the text where it seems like he's interrupted the normal flow of the exposition. And for the piece of wax, at least, and I'll mention this as we pass by it today, at the point that he's talking about the piece of wax, he's still unsure whether or not material things exist, right? And what is the wax? It's a material thing, right? So yeah, he's in the process. What was that, John?
It was a very interesting tangent.
It is an interesting tangent, and it's one of these things where it's just well, why is that there? Why is he reintroducing a conversation about how it is that he perceives some sort of material body when he doesn't even believe that these things exist yet? There are a couple of these throughout the meditations. I'll mention them. I think this is kind of advanced stuff. It's trying to figure out where all these weird parts fit and what it is that they're doing, if they're doing anything at all. But I think we've got our work cut out for us just kind of following the main argument without following these tangents. So if it comes up, if there's something that's kind of crucial and tricky and you're just yeah, but that piece of wax, let's talk about it, I'm willing to. But let's see if we can get all the basic stuff done first. So, meditation 1, meditation 2. What happens in meditation 1?
throw it all out?
Throw it all out, right? This is all about doubt. Meditation 1 is all about doubt, and we talked about it's a radical doubt. Throw it all out, right? But not for really real. Descartes is not, it's methodological. It's not a full-blown skepticism as a way of life. It's just saying, for the sake of this exercise, we need to throw everything out. Because we're looking for a foundation, right? We're looking for a foundation, a firm foundation on which to base all of our other beliefs. So we talked about this as foundationalism. It's a particular epistemological viewpoint to say that the way that knowledge works is you find a firm foundation and then you build off of that. If you don't have that firm foundation, then there's no real knowledge. We would have some other form of skepticism. Nobody knows anything because there's no form. For those who don't know what epistemology is, or for those who just kind of want to hear it again because it's fun. Epistemology is the study of knowledge. Basically, it's the branch of philosophy that has to do with determining what knowledge is and how we come by it. Yeah. And one of the positions in epistemology, perhaps, I don't know, if you talk to an epistemologist, I've talked to at least one epistemologist who my sense is he wouldn't call this a legit epistemology, but one of the bugbears, at least in epistemology, is skepticism. This idea that there is no knowledge possible. That's a very short epistemology book, right? It's like maybe 1 page long. What can we know, and what is knowledge? Knowledge is this thing that we can't attain, and we know, see Appendix A for things we know, and there's nothing there, right? So a lot of epistemology is like skeptics versus everybody else, trying to say like, no, skeptics, we do know things, and here's why. This is what knowledge is. So foundationalism. And we talked about 3 distinct arguments here in Meditation 1 for how we get to radical methodological doubt. They don't all get us there, right? They don't all get us to the radical part. The first 2 steps just get us to be a little doubtful and then a little more doubtful. But it's not until the introduction of the possibility of this evil deceiver that we go full-blown, radical methodological doubt and try to start over from nothing. Try to find this firm foundation. In Meditation 2, we get this firm foundation, or we get a starting point, right? Something that we know for sure, something that can't be doubted. And this is? Yeah. I exist. I exist. And beyond that I exist, I know a little something about the kind of thing I am. A thinking thing. We didn't get talking about this too much, but I exist, and I am a thinking thing. Yeah, that this is something that I know for sure. This is a certain piece of like foundational knowledge because it cannot be doubted. There is no coherent way of doubting that I exist. And the way that Descartes gets to this, and we can imagine like many different routes, and I think the flavor, the character, the structure of this argument is a fascinating sort of one. It's got a weird sort of a way that it ticks, such that some people might even say that it's circular. And I think we talked about this on Thursday, right? We noted that it seems circular, but perhaps it's not a vicious circularity. Perhaps it's a virtuous circularity. But it seems like it comes from this kind of popularization of what Descartes is talking about here in this phrase, cogito ergo sum, right? Which we talked about. He never actually says it quite like that. But this, I'm thinking, therefore I exist. The recognition that he's thinking, and we talked about all kinds of different modes of thinking too, right? So there's thinking in general, and then there are various like particular species of thinking, like affirming, doubting, denying, perceiving, imagining, etc., etc. We're going to look at today, we're going to look at some new faculties of the mind that we hadn't really mentioned just yet. Yes?
They might be the same thing, but is saying I am a thinking thing different than just saying, like, I think? Or
Yes.
is it, I am a thinker?
Yeah, and we didn't really flesh this out on Thursday, so I want to take some time to talk about this I am a thinking thing and how it is that he gets here. Make sure that we all get the sense that, like, when he says I am a thinking thing, we are aware of like how it is that he comes to this conclusion. Because it's a jump, right? I exist seems like it's a jump from nothing to I exist, and then he jumps from I exist to I am a thinking thing, and we want to make sure that those jumps are safe, right? And we want to get some sense over like what the content is. So yeah, I'll definitely follow up on that. There were some other hands. Yes, Garrett. Then Andrew.
Something I don't know if we touched on last time is that when he says, I am a thinking thing and this cannot be doubted, isn't that something that like you're inherently saying, I cannot doubt this, but other people could? Like, he doesn't seem to touch on the fact that he could just be, he wouldn't have used this term, but a robot in somebody else's like world. He kind of assumes that he's the thinker and not somebody else. And not somebody else is the thinker, right? Yeah. So let's address it. There are a bunch of different things going on in there, and like yes, he is. I don't know if you used the word assuming. I think he's maybe not assuming, but he's certainly taking this position that he's the thinker of his thoughts. I think he's claiming it. Like and I think he's got an argument. He's got reasons for why he's allowed to claim this. He's allowed to claim it and still be kind of like meeting the standard of certainty that he's laid out in Meditation 1. And please do keep track of this as I go off on another little tangent. I'll get back to it eventually. But keep thinking to yourself, every time he makes one of these steps, ask yourself, is he holding to the standard of certainty that he set for himself in Meditation 1? This whole project started because he's like, can't be certain, so throw everything out.
If he starts bringing things back in without being certain, yeah, and he did, or he seems like he does it, we'll take a closer look. Be like, oh, does he? Doesn't he? I'll usually end up taking the job of trying to defend Descartes on these, and I'm gonna act as if like, no, he does it. He pulls everything off. And yeah, usually that's how it works, right? I'm defending the text. You guys are kind of like, but no. So keep track of this, because this is going to be our first reflection draft. I'll be posting this on Thursday. It's going to be asking, does he make it all the way through all 6 meditations while maintaining this standard, or does he drop it at a certain point? Andrew. Oh wait, I didn't get back to the question, which was, is he assuming that he can't doubt it without attending to whether or not other people can doubt it?
Yes.
Okay, right. So we talked a little bit about, on Thursday, we talked a little bit about this idea that this, I am thinking, comma, I exist, or I am thinking, therefore I exist, if we want to give it that formulation. Though we also talked about why that might be dangerous, because logic itself is up for grabs with the evil deceiver in the room. This only works a certain way. So if I said, I am running, therefore I exist, this doesn't accomplish the same thing that I am thinking, therefore I exist. Why is that?
You doubt the material world and therefore doubt that you are running.
Yeah, so I can believe that I'm running, but that doesn't mean that I'm running, right? Yeah, whereas thinking is immaterial, and that's going to I'm a thinking thing, not a material thing. But also, if I think I'm thinking, then I'm thinking, right? It's a self-accomplishing act. Even to doubt that I'm thinking. Doubt is a mode of thought, right? So if I doubt that I'm thinking, right? This is why I can't coherently doubt whether I'm thinking. Because if I do, then I need to recognize that I'm saying I am thinking that I'm not thinking. That's silly people say that. So yeah, so we've got that. Also, we talked a little bit about, and the phrase that we used for this was solipsism. Solipsism, which means being alone. It's like where Descartes leaves us in Meditation 2 is a lonely, lonely place. It's not a completely empty universe. He's in it, but nothing else.
I can only be sure of my own.
Yeah, you can only be sure of your own mind because only you can say, I think that I'm thinking, and make that always true, right? I think that I'm thinking is always a true statement whenever it's uttered or thought. But I think that Garrett's thinking? Sure, maybe I think it, but that doesn't mean that Garrett is thinking, right? If I think that, this doesn't work as well. It's kind of like the I am running, therefore I exist thing. It only works when I'm thinking about thinking. There's a kind of like a reflexivity to it. There's something self-referential. And there's something about it that means it has to be my mind. I'm thinking about my own thinking. This doesn't work for other people. So Descartes is left with this idea that like other people maybe exist, maybe don't. I'm not certain of that. All I am certain of is my own existence. So again, still a pretty sparse landscape in Descartes' universe here by the end of Meditation 2. There's just him. And he's not even like looking down at him. Like he is the perspective, right? There's a single subjective perspective in the middle of nothingness, and that's all we got at the end of Meditation 2. Andrew.
Just for, I guess, clarification, if you had to rewrite, I think, comma, I exist, or how he wrote it, would you say it's an if-then statement, or more or less an equality? Is it I think, thinking equals existence, or if I think, therefore I am?
Yeah. And I think I might have mentioned this on Thursday. If I had to describe the sort of, I'm not going to do it exactly the way that you left me with an either or, and I'm going to say like, I don't know about either one of those. But yeah, it seems like an if-then's going to be a little bit tricky. Where Descartes leaves it, it seems like there are a lot of possible options for what's going on. One might be that he realizes that he's not bringing it back. He maybe realizes that he never could have doubted it in the first place. That he was pitching everything out, all of the beliefs out. And it's easy to say, get rid of everything. But if you actually had to go through and like get rid of each, like pick up each idea and inspect it and be like, am I certain? No. Am I certain? No. And he kind of decided at the end of Meditation 1 that like, yeah, just throw it all out. But he realizes in the process that like he never could have doubted his own existence. So that's one way, is that he doesn't bring himself back in. It never really left. Another way to do it is to recognize the necessary truth of I think I'm thinking, and recognize that the only available explanation for that is for me to exist. Or we might say that I'm imagining possible scenarios where I could doubt. Like this ends up being like a way more imaginative and like requires a lot of work from the imagination of the meditator or anybody who's following along, is to say, like, when we're wondering whether or not we should doubt something, we should see if we can imagine a scenario where we're wrong. And the scenario that like made me the most wrong about the most things was the evil deceiver. And we recognize that there's no way for the evil deceiver to deceive me without there being a me. So again, the only possible explanation for me thinking is that I exist. This is a style of inference to best explanation that's like particularly strong. It's the inference to the only available explanation. Yes?
Is thought here an action, or can you give a counterexample of grammar as a material grammar?
Yeah. Is thought an action? That's interesting. As opposed to what, like a passion? Something that you suffer? Thought happens to you? Yeah.
I'm wondering just to specify more what it is. So
Descartes hasn't said just yet. We're going to get some taste of this in Meditation 4. We're going to look at least one function of the mind that seems particularly active. By the time we get to Meditation 6, we'll also be talking about some passive aspects of the mind as well. And this is a relatively old idea by the time Descartes' on the scene. Aristotle had worked out active and passive nous by then already. This idea that there are some parts of your mind that are active and kind of proactive. They are like the movers and doers. There are other parts of your mind that are passive. For example, perception seems to be a relatively passive sort of activity of the mind. And it's one form of thinking. And we're going to look at willing today in Meditation 4, which seems a particularly active sort of aspect of thought. Yep.
And to be clear, he's not saying that active thought or that a particular mode of thought is necessary to exist, simply that thought is evidence that I exist.
Yeah. Yeah. And even evidence runs us afoul of like, well, the evil deceiver can mess with the way that you interpret evidence. But yeah, it's a reason. Right, yeah. It's, the fact that I am thinking can only be explained by my existence. And there's no, even like my wildest sort of imaginations about how I could be deceived or wrong about things can't ever make it so that I don't exist. Yeah.
How would that play into somebody with multiple personality disorder, where you have multiple personalities within a single mind, that all of a sudden they exist independently?
My sense is that, one, there's not a whole lot of psychological consensus about whether or not people actually do have multiple personalities. So if this is a genuine phenomenon, and there's a pretty big if on that, right? If this is a genuine phenomenon, my sense is that those multiple personalities are never present at exactly the same time. They kind of revolve in and out. Is that right?
Yes,
I'm describing something that might not be a thing, but if it is a thing, it seems like that's how it is.
based on understanding.
Yeah. In which case, if they are genuinely distinct subjects, then maybe, yeah, maybe they're different selves. They're all different eyes. And for any one of them, they might be sitting there wondering like, well, I know that I'm thinking right now and that I exist. But think about this. If you were somebody who suffered from some form of, a psychotic break that fractured your persona into many different pieces, would you be absolutely certain that the other personalities really existed? No, you couldn't be. So, same sort of solipsistic thing. Yeah, you would know that you exist, but not necessarily all of your other personalities. You might have certain memories, or people would tell you things, but they could fool you, right? You could be mistaken about that sort of stuff.
Even if it was compartmentalization, wouldn't that mean that a single thinker can generate individual identities that genuinely think themselves to be independently existing?
If it could happen, then yeah, they would be independent thinkers. Yeah. How did you describe it?
Like if you have one person that's compartmentalized their mind into
Yeah.
different personalities,
Right.
and it actually goes so far as to each personality considers itself its own entity.
Its own entity. Then they
You have
are.
a single thinker that has generated multiple thinkers who think they are genuinely existing.
That's the part that I'll kind of say, like, I'm not sure about that. I don't know that the single thinker created all the personalities. Yes. And then, Brian, yeah.
I think Descartes would argue, perhaps with Meditation 3, that the thinker couldn't have created those other thinkers, that would be an act in which God either created them separately or rather split one creation because of the imperfect way in which God would make a thinker like Descartes wouldn't grant him that kind of power.
I'm not so sure if I'll commit to that, but that's a really interesting comment that, let's put a pin in that. When we do get to talking about God, we'll compare it to this idea of, can I have invented an idea of another thinker versus could I have invented the idea of God? That ends up being where a lot of Meditation 3 is hinging. Any other questions about 1 and 2 so far? Yes.
I'd like to point out that with every single time all of you tried to even phrase that.
All of us?
Yes, everyone who was trying to phrase the multiple personality thing, it was always, you had to, you start off with, this person has multiple personalities, or that person, it was always you.
We're always assuming that it's all one person.
There was a person, yes, and
Yeah.
that was a condition.
Yeah.
Some sort of a privation in their cognitive faculties.
Probably a better description of it, like, as a psychological phenomenon, is that there is one body that manifests what seems like different. Why would we call it one entity? I suppose we could. We could say one entity, the same way that, like, this class is one entity.
Yeah.
So yeah, if we can be one entity,
I would say that physical construct, because I guess you could consider, if you were to consider each person as its own entity, then I guess you could say that physical construct of the body holds multiple.
but here we're way ahead. We're putting the cart before the horse, right? We're putting Descartes before the horse. Where we're talking about, like, well, how would we describe, like, are the multiple selves in somebody with multiple personality disorder, are they genuinely distinct individuals? Where Descartes, where we are right now is that there's only one. There's only one thinker, for sure, and that's me. And you would say, like, well, what about other minds? And Descartes would be like, I don't even know if they exist. So please don't ask me to classify them. Meanwhile, here's a piece of wax. Blah, 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 blah. Yeah. So, like, it's tough. This is one of the things that I think is the most difficult, and it's instructive, I think, even to watch Descartes maybe slip up, or maybe he's, like, maybe there's something more intentional at work where he does this. But, like, it's one thing to say that I'm going to just suspend belief on everything that I'm not certain about. It's another thing to actually do it, and to keep that sustained throughout all 6 meditations. I'm sure as you guys are, and we're kind of putting it on display now in the conversation that we're having, is that all of these ideas that we're really not sure of are still slipping back into our conversation. What do we do about other minds? What about our bodies? And we're just like, I don't even know if any of those things exist just yet. Yes?
There's no perfect argument.
No perfect argument. Well, I don't know. That one was pretty good. As elegant arguments go, I don't know. That one's up there with that which is, and that which is not, is not.
So, one thing I was wanting to clarify, in Meditation 3, he spends a bit talking about, like, the difference between the reality of things which you imagine and the reality of things which exist.
Yeah, and it's not just imagination. It's like the way that I represent ideas,
the way you perceive
Yeah, the
things.
difference between ideas and their correlates.
And, like, he establishes a relationship that, like, there can never be something that... I'm unclear in the relationship he establishes between what he judges and what he thinks is actually there that leads him to, therefore, God must be real.
Okay, good. We'll get to that. Yeah, so that's Meditation 3. God exists. Surprise. And Meditation 4 is about it's about error and how error happens. And before we get to all of that, I want to make sure that we're good on something else. I'm not going to leave myself enough room there. I'll do it like this. How is it that Descartes decides that he's a thinking thing?
Can't prove it? Or doubt it?
Yeah, can't disprove it is... That's actually a pretty low bar for believing something. You can't prove that it's not true, therefore I'll believe that it is true? But he can't doubt it? Why can't he doubt that he's a thinking thing? Because if he is doubting, then he's thinking. Now, To say that he is thinking is one thing. To say that he is a thinking thing, maybe a little bit different. The phrase that he's using here is res cogitans. This is Latin, and res kind of means thing. Sometimes people will translate this as substance. So res cogitans, sometimes we'll say thinking thing, maybe thinking substance. And substance, whoo, oh boy, don't get me started on substance. That's a big, big concept, and everybody seems to use it in a slightly different way. But if I had to sum up exactly what substance was all about, with my fingers crossed behind my back, I'd say something like, substance is that by virtue of which something is, by virtue of which something exists. Sometimes we'll talk about it as the thingliness of a thing, the thing that makes the thing a thing. Sometimes we'll talk about it, and I want to resist the urge to say stuff, the stuff of something, because that's a very particular view of substance. That's kind of a materialist view about substance, that the material stuff is what makes that thing an existing thing. Sometimes we'll talk about the essence, the what it is to be of something, as Aristotle puts it. Its essence is, or its form, or something like that.
It's like the
The hyacity, yeah, the like what makes a thing, yeah. So yeah, the thingliness of things is how we might talk about hyacity, yeah. So all of these things maybe should be bouncing around your head as you're reading this and thinking to yourself, like, what does Descartes think that substance is? How is he using this word when he says res cogitans? And what else? What other kinds of substances might there be? Well, by the end of Meditation 2, we only have the one for sure, right? If I'm thinking, then I must be the sort of thing that's capable of thought. What other things might I suppose about myself? Let's kind of loosen up the radical methodological doubt for just a second and be like, what else might people say about themselves? Yeah.
My thinking must have had some sort of like beginning, or like there must be a cause to my thoughts.
Yeah, which doesn't necessarily. So are those causes a different kind of thing? Or the causes of my thoughts might be other thinking things? That's certainly possible. It seems like the evil deceiver was one, that version of things was one where he said, another thinker of thoughts is the cause of the thinker of my thoughts, or the cause of my thoughts that I'm thinking.
That we have senses.
That we have senses, so yeah, it can be caused by the external world. The material external world? Like material bodies. Do most of you think, when I say you, do you think, is your body part of that picture? We have this other possible substance. I'm going to go ahead and put a question mark by it because we don't know if it exists just yet by the end of Meditation 2. We'll call this res extensa, extended things, right? Or an extended thing, which we might think of as literally this is extended. And all we mean by extended is, like, for example, extended in space, right? Something that takes up space is extended. Extended, or sometimes material thing or substance. And what Descartes recognizes here by the end of Meditation 2 is, and he recaps it again in the beginning of Meditation 3, is that because he was able to determine that he exists, he was sure about his own existence, and he was able to do this without any reference to his body or without any reference to material substance whatsoever. Without even believing that material substance exists, he was able to demonstrate that he exists. This must mean that materiality is just not essential to whatever it is he is. Does that make sense? If you can be certain of your own existence just by recognizing that you're thinking, and you can do this while suspending the supposition that you actually have a body, then this means that you are not your body. You may have a body, maybe the evil deceiver's fooling you about that, but whatever you are, it's something else. Not res extensa, which your body might have, but we don't even know if that exists. Res cogitans. So immediately what we get is this splitting of the world into at least this one substance, and if bodies exist at all, they would be a separate substance. This is what's known as a position that we call substance dualism. that there are two distinct kinds of substance in the world, one material and the other one immaterial, perhaps a thinking substance, res cogitans. Descartes' substance dualism is, I think, such a powerful articulation of the position that almost all the time when people are talking about substance dualism, they're talking about some version of Cartesian dualism. So for example, if you believe that you have a soul and that when your body dies, your soul won't die, that your soul can't be destroyed, that your soul isn't even made up of material stuff, that it's some kind of like immaterial, I don't know, ghost or like whatever spirit, whatever it is that your soul is, if it isn't your body, something distinct from your body, then it seems like you have some leanings towards Cartesian dualism. This is going to create some serious problems. We're going to see them in Meditation 6. We're going to see them when we look at Princess Elizabeth's correspondence with Descartes. But this is kind of a relatively important moment. He's not the first dualist. He's just maybe the most famous.
How is it different from Platonic?
Platonic dualism is different because I'm not sure if I would call Plato a dualist in the first place. Plato does talk about the difference between like the material world and the world of the forms, but he talks about the world of the forms as being more real. And insofar as the material world has any reality or any truth to it at all, it's because it participates in the world of the forms, the intelligible forms, right? So it's entirely possible to think of Plato as an idealist only, and insofar as there's matter, it's somehow illusory. So we might be able to think about Plato as a dualist, but it seems like he's privileging one of those two as more real. Plato's a little complicated on this, kind of like, is he a dualist? Is he something else? What's the alternative for, or one of the alternatives for dualism would be materialism, which is only one form of monism, right? Like dualism would be there are two substances, substance dualism. A substance monist says there's only one substance. The most common form of that is materialism, to say that there are no souls, there are no immaterial things. There are just bodies and the things that bodies do. There are other forms of monism, including like idealism, some form of radical metaphysical idealism where we would say there is no matter, only ideas. Yeah, Bishop Berkeley is somebody who takes up this position. All right, so substance dualism, res cogitans, which totally exists. And because I can conceive of my own existence without even imagining that there's a body, without even assuming that there's a body, whilst suspending my belief on whether or not I have a body at all, this must mean that my body is not essential to what I am. And I am essentially res cogitans. That's what I am. I'm just a thinking thing. Was that safe? See what I mean by that jump from I exist to I'm a thinking thing? That's an important progression that he makes there, right? It goes from nothing to I exist, and we're all like, if you think that's a good argument, it might be because it actually is a good argument. It might be because maybe you weren't really suspecting that you didn't exist in the first place. You didn't really ever doubt that. This kind of confirmed your suspicions. You're like, oh, therefore I exist. And you're like, all right, yeah, good argument. Moving on. It's when the conclusion is a little different than what you were expecting that suddenly you're just kind of like, I don't know about that argument. Are you not sure about the argument, or are you not sure about the conclusion? If his argument's good, that should be enough to persuade us. This is what's known as the conceivability argument. That whatever I am, call it mind, call it soul, call it me, call it I, call it the ego cogito, whatever you want to call it, because it can be conceived without any body, that means that it's not a body. That's not its essence. Yes?
So it can be conceived without a body, as Descartes says, I have just done so, but like Descartes is doing so now. Does he ever dwell on the fact that like I might not have necessarily been able to do so at some point, and so like there must be a reason why my thinking self wasn't able to do so, that thus like potentially ties me to materialism? Because,
Yeah.
like as a child, in order to do this logic, I think Descartes would admit that like wouldn't have been able to do this logic. So the question of perhaps because I was limited materialist.
Yeah, it's uncertain as to whether or not, like, how would Descartes respond to this? It's certainly uncertain. In fact, I might even go as far as to say that, like, it seems plausible what you're suggesting, that not everybody is going to be able to follow this, right? And so if they don't follow it, what does that mean? That they're not a thinking thing? That they can't conceive of themselves without their bodies? Maybe. I think we might also alternatively say that, like, that doesn't matter. There are all kinds of truths that, like, we haven't become aware of yet. That doesn't stop them from being true. Yeah. Maybe it's enough that Descartes proves that, like, if you follow him along in his thought process, you'll see what's evident by the natural light. You'll see what is shown as clear and distinct. Oh, shit, man. Clear and distinct. Did you notice this, like, quagmire that apparently we've waded into in Meditation 3? Clear and distinct. Which is the, in fact, I'm not even going to do that one first. First I'm going to do clarus et distinctus, which is what Descartes says in the Meditations in Latin. We have folks like Haldane and almost everybody else translating this as clear and distinct, which seems a pretty easy translation choice, given that we're translating from the Latin clarus and distinctus. And then what do we get in our other reading, in the Jonathan Bennett? Yeah, it's clear in something else, and the weird thing is that he doesn't translate clarus as clear. He translates distinctus as clear. And what does he do for clear? Or clarus? Ooh, close. Vivid. There we go. Vivid and clear. So what's interesting about this, and why it's important to, like, try to wrap our heads around, like, what the heck is Descartes talking about when he's talking about ideas that are clear and distinct, is that this is his standard now. By the time he gets done with the second meditation, he kind of goes like, hey, I just proved something. How'd I do that? And looks back and says, like, whatever I just did, it seemed like that was a safe assumption. I did get a firm foundation that I can start building off of again. So what did I do? And by looking at that, can I find some sort of standard to say that, like, if I can get to that again, then that'll be something else I can toss into my world of things in my head, right? The ideas that I'll commit to, that I'll affirm. There are all kinds of, there are books and books about, like, what Descartes means by clear and distinct. One of the difficult things about it is that there's already a technical sense of these terms that Descartes is walking into. I think it's William of Ockham who nails these down in a particularly clear and distinct way. He's thinking of clarity and distinctness as ways of, let's say an idea of a dog. If my idea of a dog was able to, like, I have an idea of a dog. I'm like, all right, this, like, whatever it is that I think a dog is. What do you think a dog is? How would you define a dog? Small horse? What do you mean? Like, it's hair, it's furry, it's hairy, and it's got 4 legs.
4 legs, small,
Barks.
Typically. So if I take out its vocal box, it's not a dog.
Then it's not a dog anymore. Yeah, so this is a problem. Yeah, or we might describe it in such a way that I could point to an ugly cat and be like, this matches the description. Is it a dog? An ugly cat that barks. Squirrels bark, so a squirrel. Is a squirrel a dog as well? So yeah, we can miss this in a variety of ways, and we've done it in at least 2 different ways just now. So when we point out that you could remove the larynx from a dog and it would still be a dog, so this barks criterion seems a little bunk. What we're recognizing is my idea of dog, or the definition of dog that I was operating under, this concept of dog, misses some dogs. In order for an idea to be clear, I can't ever miss a dog. If my idea of like my concept of a dog is a clear concept, then every time there's a dog, I call it a dog. Now I could do this by saying it's an animal. I'll catch every single dog if my concept of a dog is an animal. But it's not distinct, right? Yeah, so distinctness means you never mistakenly call a non-dog a dog, right? You never mistakenly apply the concept. This is how William of Ockham is thinking of it. For something to be clear and distinct, it's a concept that always catches its correlate and never catches something else. right? I don't leave any dogs out of this idea, and I don't accidentally let any non-dogs in. This is how William of Ockham is working with it. If you go through and try to read Meditation 3 or the rest of the meditations thinking that that's what Descartes means by clear and distinct, you're going to get confused because it seems like he's not using it that way at all. It's close. There's something to it, but this is one of the reasons why Bennett is saying, like, let's not even tangle ourselves up with this clarity distinctness thing. Let's talk about vivid and clear. And this gets at another idea that Descartes drops when he's talking about the level of certainty that he's expecting of himself from here on out. He says something like, evident by the natural light. Yeah, good question. I do not know. I do not know, except to say that, and Descartes referenced this a little bit back in Meditation 1, when he was kind of getting a little squirrely about whether or not he's dreaming. He said something along the lines of, but aren't my waking perceptions more vivid than my dreaming perceptions? Like, can you tell the difference between, for example, we might even talk about the difference between imagination and perception, right? Imagination is, you close your eyes, I say, think of a banana, and you picture a banana in your mind's eye. Is this less vivid than looking at an actual banana? Is there something weaker or fainter about it? So there's something about this idea of natural light. We also might kind of refer to just the way that things click when you understand them completely as well, right? I can talk about whether or not an idea is clear and distinct in your mind by asking you, like, do you have it? And I think we all, as students, right, we all have experiences where you're just kind of like, it's not clear yet. Like, the professor's talking about something, you're like, I still don't get it. And we know that feeling of, like, when it finally does click, and you're just like, yeah, I get it now. Do you know what that is like? If there's anybody who, like, no, haven't had, I'm rooting for you. Maybe this semester will be the time that you have this lightning bolt moment. Plato got into this too when he was talking about recollection as, like, coming to knowledge, like discovering that you knew something all along is this thing, it's like recollection, which I'm not sure exactly how seriously or how literally we're supposed to take that story. But it does seem true that that lightning bolt moment when everything makes sense is an awful lot like remembering something that you forgot. It feels the same. And it seems like maybe Descartes is reaching for this too. Another way that we could translate it, and I think that this is maybe the most useful way to understand clarity and distinctness. And sorry, you're just going to have to kind of try to triangulate between all of these different concepts whenever Descartes talks about this, is this idea of something being undoubtable. If it's undoubtable, then it'll be clear and distinct. Or maybe it's the other way around. If it's clear and distinct, it'll be undoubtable. Or maybe we don't need to worry about the directionality. If they're defined as one another, then it goes both ways. Yes?
Okay, so when looking at it as evident by natural light as being like this thing you feel you fully grasp or judged correctly, like doesn't that also get at the assumption that your judgments are correct when you say that you have fully perceived them, and we've yet to prove in our senses the means by which we judge are in any way a valid way of ascertaining anything?
But it seems like I am now wondering whether or not I can be mistaken about whether or not I've clearly and distinctly perceived something.
Yeah, because like
I could
you
think
could think you found the answer, and then you go and try it, and that is blatantly wrong.
Yeah,
And
this
it's
would-
real.
this other description that I was giving, that would be fine and dandy if every single time that I misunderstood something, I knew, right? I was just like, it's not clear yet. And every single time I had the lightning bolt moment, I got it right? I really did fully understand something. But we've all also had this experience of saying like, I get it. And it's not till 2 units later that you realize, shit, I did not get it. I thought I got it, but I got something else. Something else that wasn't it. Yeah.
It's almost like he's jumping to this conclusion before he's firmly laid down the foundation in a lot of places.
Yeah, or he's at least he's trying to paint a picture of what the conclusion would have to be like in order for it to be the sort of thing that he affirms. But I think you're right. This is starting to get into Cartesian circle territory, right? Yeah. When people talk about the Cartesian circle, this is usually what they're referring to. This idea that being able to reliably identify when your ideas are clear and distinct, this seems like something that he hasn't really quite yet proven yet.
Do you think he's laxing his standards as we move forward? Because it
Oh, I think that that's a question that I'm going to ask you for your next writing assignment. So, like, I'm more curious what you think. Yeah, I'm not gonna tell you what I think just yet. But yeah, so this is a possibility that, like, this is not the sort of thing that we have any reliability about yet. He recognizes it looking backwards on this idea that he exists, that he says is undoubtable, but is evident by the natural light. This feeling of certainty, is this actually going to be enough going forward? Perhaps. This might be reliable, and this starts to get into meditation 4 territory. This might actually be reliable if God exists and if we can assume certain things about God. So let's walk before we run, right? Let's do these things one step at a time. There's a reason why Meditation 3 comes before 4. We've got this business going on, and we also have this other thing that Garrett mentioned earlier in the class, and that you said you were a little confused by, and I don't blame you. It's a weird, weird idea. But this is kind of, it's one of the necessary tools that he uses to prove the existence of God. And this is about ideas. First of all, ideas, can we all agree with this? Ideas aren't even the kind of thing that can be true or false. Ideas are like, you have an idea, and it's just like, yeah, beliefs are true and false, right? What he ends up saying is affirmations, right? You can commit yourself to thinking that that belief is somehow corresponding to something else out in the world, right? Or that idea is corresponding to something else out in the world. But to have the idea is not even the sort of thing that can be true or false.
It's not a judgment.
It's not a judgment just yet, yeah. Judgments are the sorts of things that can be true or false. But ideas, no. So ideas are not even the sort of thing that can be true or false, but we can talk about, we can talk about the reality of an idea. Maybe. 2 different kinds of reality that Descartes introduces. And, you know, for our reading pleasure, Bennett and Haldane translate this in like wildly different ways. So we have what is usually referred to as maybe formal, or that's what Haldane calls it, formal. And most translators will talk about this as being formal reality. What else? Bennett calls it actual, I think. Actual reality. I think maybe once or twice he calls it implicit reality. And then we have this other thing that, and I see why Bennett makes this change, that Haldane and others will call objective reality. And Bennett calls it representative, which is like way closer to what Descartes' talking about. Representative reality. Yeah. And one of these has, and like why we would think that these are the same thing. Maybe this is because objective just means something else in the context of like the way that we're using language now.
The definition change?
The context.
I guess objective has sort of been, I sort of want to say weaponized.
Yeah, or yeah, that we take objective to mean like the same for everybody, or like true regardless of whether anybody believes it or not, or something like this. Objective is, yeah, not up for debate perhaps, but literally the word just means of we're relating to objects.
But all of these things are up for debate. So.
This is true. This is true, yeah. So if we want to, let's think of actual. I think this probably gets closest to what Descartes is talking about with this type of reality. And Bennett does a good job here. I think representative is really, really good for getting the sense of what Descartes is talking about here. And this has to do with the difference between the kinds of realities that ideas have, because an idea is totally a real thing, right? An idea is something that is happening in my mind. If I'm having an idea, like that's a real thing. It's a phenomenon in the world.
What allows fiction to exist in a way that we can talk about?
Well, at least in the sense of the idea, right? But also on top of that, my ideas, so like any idea I have does have actual reality as an actually existing thing. And then on top of that, my ideas are ideas of things.
Therefore,
Yeah, so there's a kind of like, there's a reality that they have in terms of the reality of the thing that they're representing if it were to exist, right? Does that distinction make sense, more or less? The distinction between my ideas and the things that they're ideas of, that makes sense to me. Talking about them as different kinds of reality, that makes me get squinty. And talking about things having more or less reality, that's another one where I'm just like, what? More or less reality? Can something have more or less actual reality? We might be inclined to say something like, look, either it's real or it's not. There's no halfway. So what does it mean? Yeah, and what does Descartes mean? You might have to turn to your book on this. What does Descartes mean when he talks about more and less actual reality? Yes?
I mean, what about like schizophrenia that experience like hallucinations and stuff like that? It's not like real in the external world, it's like real to them.
We don't even need them to be schizophrenic. They could just be like having a mirage from lack of hydration.
Or you just be back to like step 1 in meditation 1, right? Any sort of perception that I have is fallible. And I could be, but then we're talking about, this is the judgments that I make, right? The judgments that you make about the ideas are fallible. The ideas themselves, are the ideas like any less real?
An idea is, like you said, it's not.
The idea is the idea, right? It is whatever it is.
The idea is not.
I can make a judgment that the idea like corresponds to something, but that's a different thing than the idea. The way that Descartes ends up working this out, mostly just because this class is going to end at some point, and I want to make sure we cover everything, is when he talks about more and less actual or formal or implicit reality, this is the reality of actually existing things, he talks about their independence. Something that is more independently existing is going to have more actual reality. So for example, tallness. Tallness is a real thing. Let's assume. Like tallness is actually something. But you can't have tallness without tall things, right? Yeah, maybe without short things too, yeah. Can you have things without tallness? Can you have like material, and what kinds of things too? Can res cogitans be tall? Can a thinking substance be tall? Yeah, extended things are tall. So material bodies can be tall. I can't have tallness without material bodies, but I can have material bodies without tallness. So material bodies exist independently of tallness, but tallness is not independent of material bodies. By this measure, tallness has less actual reality than the material things that are tall. This is like one way that we might think about this. Yeah. This is going to be important for God as well, because God is supposedly like independent of me, right? But I'm not independent of God. So they say. Yes.
You keep talking about tallness like it's a property, but tallness is a relation. It's incoherent apart from...
Taller is a relation.
What is
Even tallest is a relation.
What is tallness if it's not a relation? How
It's
can
that,
it...
yeah. It's a concept.
Height must be a better word.
But what I'm saying is, just having height, according to that, then the smallest quark, subatomic particle, has tallness. Because if it's not in relation to anything,
If
then
it's extended,
you're committed to
it could
that.
have. Well, we're not. It doesn't have to be something that isn't relational. We could also say that tallness is an inherently relational concept. Yeah, sure. Is blondness an inherently relational concept?
Did you say blindness or blondness?
I said blondness, but we could do blindness as well.
Blindness is a privation.
Privation of something. So that is a little relational as well. What about blondness? Not relational?
Yeah, that's not relational.
That one's safe? Okay. Blondness has less actual reality than the material things that are blonde. Some of them are blonde, some of them are not. Because you have to be a material thing in order to be blonde. Blondness depends upon material bodies,
So it's just like a form.
things with color, right? What's that?
It's just like Plato's forms.
In order to answer that question, I'd have to make sure that you and I both understood Plato's theory of forms approximately the same way, and that's a project. So, office hours, please.
So objective reality, representative reality.
Yeah, representative reality is this other thing, right? Because we want to be able to talk about the comparative realities of our ideas as well. Now, we just laid out one thing that seems like it would be an awesome candidate for talking about the comparative reality of my ideas. I could say something like ideas that are more clear and distinct, right? Ideas that have more natural light shining on them. These are more real than the ideas that are confused and obscure. But he doesn't do that at all. That's not how he does it. That would be very tempting. What he does instead is he says the representative reality of ideas, noting that ideas do have their own actual reality as well. But the representative reality of an idea is proportional to the amount of actual reality that the thing that the idea is an idea of would have if it actually existed. Let's do that one more time. So I have an idea of a banana. The representative reality of that idea of the banana is proportional to the amount of actual reality that the banana would have if the banana actually existed. So ideas can have more and less representational reality. It has nothing to do with clarity and distinctness. It has to do with the amount of actual reality that the object of the idea would have. This is why it's called objective reality. But the object of the idea would have if it did exist. Okay. All of this is about God. Premise 1. I have a clear and distinct idea of an infinite being.
Does he though?
That's a really big, bold premise 1. Descartes says, I have a clear and distinct idea of an infinite being. I don't know if this being actually exists just yet, but I do have a clear and distinct idea of it. Most people call this idea God, by the way. An infinite being, a being with no limits. We might call it a perfect being. An unlimited being. Everybody has this idea. People agree and disagree about whether God exists, but they don't so much agree and disagree about this essential attribute of God. Now, this isn't entirely true because at various points during history, we humans thought about gods in ways that weren't infinite. The Greek gods were famously these sorts of things that were just kind of like slightly inflated cartoonish versions of humans. Kind of like superheroes, I suppose, right? Greek gods were like superheroes, somewhat flawed, definitely limited. And we can see how this could have been an idea invented by humans the same way that a unicorn is an idea that could have been invented by humans, right? That a unicorn is just, I saw a horse, I saw a horn, I thought of the number 1, I did 1 horn, horse. That's a unicorn. I saw a man. I saw a big man. Let's think of him as like an even bigger man, and let's put some wings on his feet, and he runs real fast. This is a god, and he's like, yeah, this is the Flash, right? Yeah. Or it's, Mercury. But an infinite God? And this isn't just an invention of Christianity or even Judaism. Xenophanes is there already talking about God being unlimited? Or just this idea of something unlimited. Anaximander gets here too, like long, long time before Descartes. The idea of something that is unlimited, the apeiron. This is an idea that everybody, when I say infinity, are you just like, what's he talking? Like, is that a squirrel? Is it a man? What is infinity? Like when I say infinity or the unlimited, when I say God lacks nothing or is perfect or unlimited or infinite or something like this, are we all like, sure, that's what the word means. I understand that concept. Whether God actually exists or not sure, but that's the idea. The idea is a perfect unlimited being. Yeah, Garrett.
But how can you say that you vividly and clearly understand the definition of what it means to be infinite? Because infinite is different depending on what you're looking at. Infinity is not even one thing. Like there are infinities mathematically that differ from other infinities. So how can you say, I have a clear conception of what it means for a being to be infinite? Even if you could assume there is one infinite, how can you as a finite being have a clear idea that there is something that even approaches an infinite being?
Well, it's a negative claim. So if we claim that what it is. You know something that is finite, and it's just you're believing the negation of that. That is, we know what finite is, and it's just not that.
So I know,
maybe
yeah.
You don't have to know what it
I
is.
know what a limit is, and I know what not means. So just not plus limit gets me unlimited, gets me the infinite. Does that satisfy you, Garrett?
Yeah, I had a second question.
Yeah. Okay. I just want to point out that like that is totally one way of talking about the clear and distinct idea of infinity that we have, and it is totally not going to work in this argument. So like keep an eye on this. Yep.
The second point is this is the idea of a perfect being, right?
Mm-hmm.
What about
Or perfect at least as a synonym for unlimited or lacking
yeah,
nothing, right?
unlimited, but Descartes doesn't seem to touch. I don't know if these philosophical arguments existed, but like the abstract problems, like the thought experiment of can a perfect being like God create a boulder he cannot lift?
Yeah, this ends up being like a little bit of what seems like a paradox. Descartes is aware of these sorts of things. I think usually the response to this is like he can, but he doesn't.
I think the answer would normally be no, he can't. That's not a limit. Yeah, when people say God is all powerful, they mean he can do all things that can be done. Because I mean,
That's
can
right.
God create a
Yeah. Can
that's
God create a round?
nonsensical. That's
Can
not
God create a
that's
round
not a
square
thing to be created.
or something like this? Yeah.
It's like,
Insofar as something can be done, God can do all doable things.
Yeah.
Right? God knows all knowable
A,
things.
and A is never not A. And if God can't do it, then it's not God.
Yeah, perhaps, right? Yeah, so we could be into that territory. Descartes is aware of this. Let's see if he manages to avoid the quagmires. There are plenty of things that are going on like this, and there are a couple of times throughout Meditations 3 and 4 where he does a kind of like mysterious waves kind of move, where like people are like, but what about like for example the problem of theodicy? This question of like how can there be evil in the world if there's an omnibenevolent God who's also all powerful and also all knowing? Are these evil things, do they escape God's notice? That's impossible if God's all knowing. Is God unable to stop them? That's impossible if God's omnipotent. Does God just let them happen when God could stop them? That doesn't seem like it's consistent with omnibenevolence. So what do we do about this? And most of the responses to this are like, world's a big complicated place. Don't pretend like you understand how the whole big picture works. There's a plan, just trust that it's a good one. And yes, those orphaned refugees who like died of starvation, that was like, yeah, that was part of the plan. Like you can't, like a world without those starving refugee orphans would actually not be as good as the world with the starving refugee orphans. That's asking a lot, right? That's asking a lot.
Utilitarian in nature.
Could be, yes. Andrew.
I think in Meditation 2, he does assert something that he uses in 3 that really makes me question why. He asserts that God is supremely good.
Oh, so yeah, so let me...
So why would, because he builds the assumption on God wouldn't deceive me because he's supremely good.
Yeah, so this ends up being Meditation 4 is like built on... Meditation 4 is about error, and it hangs on this idea of like, God wouldn't deceive me. Or God wouldn't even like design me in such a way where I was systematically prone to deception, right?
God needs to deceive you in order for the better world to happen, in order to maintain the happiness of
Yeah, perhaps, then mysterious ways, right? Yeah,
Also,
sure.
What you said, so you were stating something along the lines of a world with evil overcome is better than a world with no evil.
Yeah, so this is another one of the responses, is that like our response to theodicy is that like we have to have choices, right? That like while these moral evils in the world are a product of bad human choices, and if we weren't capable of making those choices, then we would never choose the right thing. And a world where some moral agents have free will is better than a world where no moral agents have free will. So, yeah, that's why. Yeah. This is a tangent, though. Can I finish this argument, man? Can I finish? All right. I have a clear and distinct idea of an infinite being, if you say so, Descartes. Ideas must be caused by something with greater than or equal to, I did that just with an actual infinity, not infinity, actual reality. Sorry, let's do this for real. Ideas must be caused by something with actual reality that is greater than or equal to the representative reality of the idea. Which is to say that a less real thing can't make an idea of a more real thing.
Makes sense.
Does it?
Yep.
Lovely.
To put something in a jar, you have to start off with more than something in the jar.
This is true. Yeah, we might think of it this way. We might also think of it in terms of like how the imagination does work, right? We talked about the imagination being kind of fueled by just rearranging the experiences that we've already had, right? So I can't just imagine any old thing. I can't imagine something, let's think of it this way. If I do imagine a unicorn, it's because things with at least as much reality as the representative reality of the idea. Things exist that are at least as real as unicorns would be if unicorns existed.
To fill this water bottle completely with water, I need at least the amount of water to fill the water bottle.
Yeah, okay. Let's think about it this way. Could I have invented the idea of God or the idea of an infinite being without having encountered an actual infinite being?
Yes.
How would I do it? One way that I would do it is I would say, like, finite things. I've had experiences of those. Or I know what a limit is, and I know what it means to lack something. So lacking limits, that's the infinite thing. And Descartes goes, that's not infinity. Or that's a negative conception of infinity. I'm talking about a positive conception of infinity. As the clock ticks down here, and thinking to myself, like,
Coherent.
yeah, so the difference would be infinite means to lack nothing. Is that about right? Yeah. Or to be unlimited, it means to lack nothing. If what I lack is a limit, if that's what infinity means, yeah, then I'm lacking and a limit is also another privation or a lack. It's the absence of, like the absence of being able to keep going. So if I'm saying that something that's infinite is limited by lacking limits, it would seem like I've just got this double negative. That's all infinity is, right? Is it's like don't not. A limit is just a saying like not this, nothing beyond this boundary. And we say like don't do the no thing. Either infinity is just a double negation with nothing there, like once we take away the two negations, it's just like, oh, there was nothing there. Or there's some kind of positive conception that still remains after I say like not.
Yeah.
And Descartes claims that this is a thing, and I believe him. I take this as a challenge. When somebody says, think about infinity, I'm like, all right, what am I thinking of? What's my clear and distinct idea of infinity? I think it's lacking limits. And then somebody says, like, yeah, but that's a negative conception of the idea. It seems like even recognizing that there's a limit presupposes that you know that there's a limitlessness, right? When I get to the boundary of something, I notice that the boundary is a thing because I can't keep going, right? Seems like evident when I think about like what would the edge of space be like. Doesn't this automatically bring with it the idea of like and something on the other side of the boundary? Yeah. There must be on the other side of the boundary, right? This is temporal as well. If there's a beginning, which is a temporal boundary or a temporal limit, then we have this automatic question of like, yeah, but what happened before the beginning? So we might end up saying that the positive conception is primitive, right? That the limit is a kind of ends up being a little bit of a, what's the word, for an animal that lives off another animal, or a parasite. Yeah, it's a parasitic concept, right? Limit is a concept that's parasitic on infinity, which is why we would say infinity has more formal or actual reality than limited things. Ideas must be caused by something with an actual reality greater than or equal to the representative reality of the idea. The only possible cause of my idea of infinity is an actually infinite thing.
That's concluded.
Therefore, an actually existing infinite thing exists, and the word for that is God. Therefore, God. Slippery, no doubt.
They're more sophisticated arguments.
And he makes one later on in Meditation 5, which is always a weird thing. Somebody proves the existence of God once, and they're like, want to see me do it again in a different way? And you're like, if I believed you the first time, I wouldn't need a second proof, right? So, yeah. A lot of the, I think, let's start our Thursday meeting by looking at these two premises, because they make my face scrunchy. I don't know about you.
I don't like that.
And keep this in mind. If this doesn't work, if we don't get a proof of the existence of God, then we fall back to Meditation 2 in our solipsistic hell world. All alone. If we're going to actually get through this, we can have all kinds of doubts as to whether or not Descartes is serious about this God stuff or whether he's playing politics. But it's definitely doing some work in these meditations, and you can't just get rid of it. See you guys on Thursday.